Does neuroscience underpin free will, or does it go against the idea of free will? And I think it probably would be as well to start with what one feels free will is. So I need to put this up on the screen, and there you have it. So I'm just given a simple definition here. It's the ability to deliberately choose between options. And I would say that most of us here feel that we have freedom, we have free will, so we chose to come here, we chose to stay or to leave, or we chose to eat a sandwich or not eat a sandwich or have coffee, etc. We all feel, maybe in many cases it's quite trivial things. It's trivial maybe that you come here, but it has a consequence on the rest of your day because you have 1 hour less time and therefore you're rushing for something else and you might miss the train and something else happens. And later on in the day you might actually feel that it's not you didn't have freedom in the fact that you missed the train, but if you're able to trajectory back, you'll see that life actually consists of lots of freedom to make decisions that have consequences later on, and at some level there can also be this feeling that we're not so free because of the consequences. All right, so it is, I would say, a cognitive process. It's something that's happening in the brain, it's not something that's happening in our muscles. You know, the fact that I would accidentally kick the lectern, knock over my computer and damage or something, is probably much more to do with the fact that I had a nerve impulse running down my leg and very little to do with free will. Okay? Unless I deliberately chose to kick the lectern. So there's a lot of ways in which we can think of this, and we have a feeling of what it is, and we're probably pretty accurate about that, but is there a neuroscience that underlies that, or does neuroscience or any other thing speak against that? So I said we have the feeling that it's there. So it underwrites our sense of morality, the ability to say things are right or wrong, because if you were forced to do something, you don't want to say that being forced to do it, that you had a choice. If you're forced to do it, there can hardly be a right or a wrong. If I was forced to actually shoot you, is it right or wrong to have done it if it was forced? So that freedom is a very, very important thing that underlies our sense of morality. There's a morality that I was wrong to do it because I was free to choose to do it. Somehow or other, when we make a choice, as I already said to you, it has a consequence. Sometimes it limits the freedom for later on in the day, or later on in life. The consequence of the freedom to make a choice right now limits the freedom to do something else today because you've spent an hour here. And sometimes it opens up a new freedom. So it doesn't necessarily limit us, because very often we think life becomes so oppressive because the decision I make today has a consequence and therefore holds me back, but it is not necessarily that way at all. We shouldn't think that way, because the fact that we've come here is maybe we have a new thought, maybe that opens up a new possibility, maybe it opens up a new relationship or someone else you've met, or all those sorts of things. I could go on and on. I put in this cartoon here, just have a read through it. It does underlie our sense of, it underlies the role of intentionality and guilt in our justice system. I'd like to read it. The very idea at some level that we have rules and laws means that we must have a choice to obey the rule or the law. Yeah? So, because how could you have a law that commands you to do something if you don't have the ability to actually obey the law and choose to obey the law? It's the very concept not even of the justice system, not even of rules and laws, but the very concept of obedience. The very concept of obedience implies choice. So fundamentally here we are locked into this, and maybe we're locked into it in the wrong way we're thinking. Maybe it's not really true, it's just the perception that we have. So how do we think of how the brain works? So let's just read the second one of these first. I think it's probably easier. So free will is not opposed to determinism. So free will is not at the opposite end of the spectrum. I am completely free, I am completely determined. Free will is not like that. It's not at the opposite end of the spectrum. But free will often works within deterministic processes. We are in some ways determined. What you're doing right now is predetermined by your physiology, by whether you had sleep last night. At some level there's determined processes happening already, and your freedom is operating within that. So we shouldn't think of these as going to the opposite ends of the spectrum and as being opposed to each other. That's nearly always the way this is presented, and that's how you get into an argument. You know, often you're presenting Christianity against something else. This is not the case. It's not free will against somehow or other I'm a determined organism, that I'm set by my genes, that I'm set by the interactions that I have around me. So equally, so it's a mind issue. It's a cognitive issue. So I already said, you know, the spontaneous activity of your muscles, the gurgling of your stomach when you're very hungry right now and watching me eating a few minutes ago, all of those things, yeah, they may be very well spontaneous things that happen, but at some level we're not talking, it's not a freedom. That's not the sort of freedom we're talking about. Free will is firmly rooted in the brain, and it's firmly rooted in the brain because of many experiments, but also just we can sit here and think about it and say, yeah, that's going to be the case. We have moved on such that we don't start to imagine that the free will resides in the heart or free will resides somewhere else. Okay, so it's a cognitive process where we have to use our minds. Let me come back to the second part of the sentence where we have to use our minds. That means it's a cognitive process that we're thinking about. So when I'm exercising free will, I'm exercising it because I'm thinking about it. It's not that it's an underlying process that's happening in your brain, the subconscious processing. Most of that subconscious process is not free at all. It's basically you have written these patterns in of how to walk. You don't think about how to walk anymore. You might think about when you learned to ride your bicycle how you did it, and then there was a freedom and a choice in doing it, but once it's done, it's packaged away and away you go, and that's subconscious. You would no longer use the term, I am freely doing this, choosing to do this, because you're just doing it in a subconscious manner. An awful lot of what's happening on day-to-day level is happening in the subconscious, an awful lot of brain processing. And therefore, the real important things to us, the real important things where we're making those decisions are often the things that involve free will. And that's why it's so important to us. So it's those things where we are thinking, we are exercising free will. Okay. So that's fundamentally, it's in the brain, and it's really important because of those things. Now, I say it's happening in the brain. What is the brain? Well, the brain is a probabilistic integrator of information. It's where all the information, I'm sorry about the terminology, but that's just the way we use it. And it's, maybe you should go and look up all the words. It's a bit like the introduction, wasn't it there? Yeah.
Is that probabilistic comes from any connection to probability of plastic?
Mathematics, yeah. Mathematics, in some ways, there's a probability events will happen, and the brain is able to predict what the outcomes might be. And therefore you'd make when you're jumping down the stairs, you make it, will I make 2 stairs at a time or 3 stairs at a time? So it's a probabilistic, or it doesn't mathematically choose all the different options and do all the variations. It just says there's a probability that I'll hit the right step and I go and do it. I jump out. Now in most of the decisions in your life, that's what's happening. We can show that very clearly because so often we can cheat the brain. We can actually get the brain to do something that's completely, absolutely ridiculous, because it's probabilistic and because we know that's the way it works. All right? So it's a probabilistic integrator of information. So in other words, it's taking information in from all the different sources around us, whether we are aware of it or not. So we're taking information into whether your eyes are open and looking at me, I will maybe respond to the question or not. Maybe if you're looking at me, I will actually have a bit more enthusiasm and jump up and down a bit more. So it's my brain is integrating, and I may not be aware of all the things that I've integrated, but it integrates maybe the light level, maybe whether you smile, maybe all those sort of things. And particularly, it is integrating people around us. It's integrating our own physiology and all of that too, but it's integrating by far the vast amount of this information where the free will is operating is at the sphere of who's around you and your circumstances and how you're actually processing that. Yeah. And that's determining how we're living. You agreed? I heard someone say it. Yeah. So there's lots of ways I could illustrate this. I mean, so like the brain. If you're going down the street, your brain is integrating what's around the next corner. Whether you meet a bicycle, how you're going to cross the street, your brain actually is able to process a lot. A lot of it's subconscious. But it's integrating. It's constantly integrating. Visual, hearing, sensing, all of those types of things. Okay, so I already told you that free will is not this sort of extremity thing. It's not operating here, it's not putting down that there are no limits on something, it's absolutely free. And it's not saying up here that there's no choice. Yeah? Free will implies, does free will imply? Well, actually, free will operates right across this continuum, but particularly in the center ground. Freedom is properly operating in the center ground. So, right from the point in time when you're a baby, you seek to express your free will. You seek to express your free will in the way you move your arms. And just watching the child last night at the life group, you think to yourself, well, actually later on those really won't be her freedoms anymore. Those won't be the sort of things that she'll be wanting to do, and they'll have moved on, and life moves on. And how are we moving on? As somehow or other our freedoms are moving on, and we're building upon those freedoms, and you today are building upon those freedoms. And why is that the case? How is it that we can build on those freedoms? Well, the reason is because the brain puts all of the information where we have had freedom earlier on into the memory banks, into the neuronal pathways, into all the sorts of processing that it does, and it sort of adds onto that. And does that then make us a deterministic organism? Does that then mean that there's so much back here that what's happening now is actually completely... No. There's a completely different set of things up here that we're now doing. And indeed we can change what's here as well. And I'll come back to that. Okay. So this is just a different way. I took this one out of the paper now. So free will operates somewhere between the determinism and the indeterminism. And I repeat what I said at the start, it's the ability to choose deliberately between the different options. And I would say, again, it involves cognition, it's centered in the brain, we have to think about it, we have to exercise the rational process, and thus free will applies to those in-the-moment decisions. And you may very well say that those in-the-moment decisions are quite trivial decisions. In fact, many times they are trivial decisions. And those are the things you decided to come here, but actually it has a great consequences. In many cases, if you have a massive decision to make, and you have no idea what way to go, that doesn't feel free at all. It just feels completely random. Yeah. So if you break that down a little bit, and then you feel you had freedom to make this little bit of a choice, and that is actually the way the brain is working. It is making a little bit of a choice, and on top of that you're making another choice, and in some ways you're building determinism, building security into it in many ways. And so we are deterministic people operating within a deterministic world. In some ways God is the framework around our world, and he is deterministic. Sorry, I shouldn't say he is deterministic. He puts that framework around us that gives us the security where we can operate. Shouldn't have said that God's deterministic. That was wrong. So I said that you're in the moment decisions. You're in the moment right now. Decisions are influencing what's happened in the future. They may very well appear to be random events. They may very well appear to be, there's very little. There's very little that we're actually making a choice about, whether it's tea or coffee right now. But that makes the difference in whether we're awake or asleep, and that makes the difference to you build it up. You build it up, and in some ways, it was Mike who pointed this out to me once. He said, the way you explain it is, it sounds like as if it's an addiction. Life is an addiction. Some way your free will is building in consequences, and some ways life then has an addiction about it. And it's like you start with alcohol, it was a free choice, and later on you drink a bit more, and it's less of a free choice, and you're addicted. And so therefore you have alcohol, and that is absolutely right. In some ways, that's a negative sort of side to it, but it could have a very, very positive connotation if you thought about that as actually the way in which you build in, you read your Bible every day and you have communication with your wife every day, you build that into your life, and then it becomes an addiction later on. In some ways, that is the way we operate. And the freedom to do it becomes set in stone, and it's a helpful way, it's not necessarily a negative thing. It can have negative stuff. So often the decisions in life appear to be the ones that are hardest, the big decisions are hardest to make. And as I also said that almost all the important decisions in life are the ones that are modulated by your will. Now, what is science to say about this? I put up the brain and I said it's all happening in the brain, but what does science have to say about it? Well, science in general has a very negative information to say about it. In some ways, science is the thing that says, no, it doesn't exist. Because we can look at the brain and we can tell you, if we do the test out the electrical signals, we tell you exactly what's going to happen next. We can tell you what your thoughts are before you have them. And you have a feeling of that yourself. You have a feeling that you're saying things before you know what you're about to say. You're listening to your own words and you're realizing that's what I said. So you have a feeling of that. But that's completely wrong. Because in some ways those words that I put together have been practiced in my head 10 times over this morning before I came here, and I have an idea what I'm going to say. I may not have practiced the talk, but at least I have an idea what I'm going to say because I have a conviction about this subject. And at some level, it's very, very easy later on to come back and say, well, indeed, the reason that I came to this meeting today, or I sat in the chair today, or I ate the egg sandwich was for X, Y, and Z. And I can give you the reasons why it happened. But that's retrospective thinking, in my opinion. Retrospective thinking. It's somehow that we can come back into each event in our life and give an explanation of it. Indeed, you can. You can give an explanation of why you're here today. But does that mean that you had no freedom in the process? Or does that simply mean that being here today was operated within a constrained environment? That there were influences around you that caused you to do the things, and where we're looking for is where the most important decisions are being made, because they are the ones where the free will is operating. I would argue that that's the case. So we're not so constrained by our culture, we're not so constrained by the genes, our environment, all sorts of things. We're not so constrained by our diseases and all the other things that we have, that we don't operate with a large level of freedom in the important events that happen in our lives and in our families. So, should I say anything more about that? All I'm thinking here is actually there's two arguments why it's an illusion. The first argument is the argument that I gave you there, that if you look in the brain you can often find that there's electrical activity that's happening before the event, and all that means is when I stood up to speak here, I was preempting what I was going to say to you. I was thinking about it before I opened my mouth to say it, and I can actually record that, and there's no big deal about it, but scientists seem to sing glory about it like as if it does away with the freedom to say that I chose to say what I said. It doesn't. It simply just means I was thinking about it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that realizing that most of your brain activity is happening at a subconscious level where you don't think about it, where you don't know what you're doing, seems to take away the possibility that there's freedom. Yeah? It seems to just, most of things, it's all subconscious. And really, there is no freedom in life. So and that is very true, most of it is subconscious, but I'm saying to you the most important decisions you're making today are not subconscious decisions, they're actually taken by your cognition. We have to bring it into active cognition in order to make it, and therefore it's not subconscious at that sort of level. I suppose the other argument in science is that behind every neuron that fires, I can find the cause, why it fired, and I could predict what would be the result of it firing, and therefore if I could actually work out all of these possibilities, that I would have an explanation for who we are and what we've done today. Now that may be true, that I could do that for the firing of my muscle, the kicking of the electron, and the knocking over of my computer. That may be true, that I could actually work all of that out. But it is not true to a large extent around the cognition areas, and there are lots of reasons for this, and I would love to go into it, but I'm not. Okay. So I said the reason that this argument gets so much traction is because of this retrospective thinking. Somehow we're reading backwards into all the events that have happened today, and we're able to actually give an explanation for them and say, I know why he did that. I know why he said that. He was not free to say that. He said it because X, Y, and Z. And it's retrospective thinking. We do an awful lot of that. We don't like it in science, but we love the explanation. So we can make excuses for everything that we did wrong. It didn't choose to criticize that person. I did it because of something else. I said even science has a tendency that to make facts fit the hypothesis. I mean, we know the brain is actually so good at doing this, so much of history might actually be very much like that. Now, I put this diagram into the paper and I'll just explain it in a few sentences here. All that this means is I find three different layers to the way in which free will operates. It's hardly operating here at all in the predetermined big issues. Somehow or other, the consequences maybe of too much traffic in Cambridge means that you will be stuck in a traffic jam on a Friday afternoon, and there's very little that you can do about it. There's no choice in it. You just get on with it. It might be your genes determine the moods that you have. Yeah, exactly. The moods that you have, your genes determine your ability to walk or run or lots of things. Maybe they determine whether you're intellectual or emotional or whatever else. And you don't have as much choice about those things. They are much, much more constrained. Yeah. But if we move straight into the center of it here, these things, that what I call proximal free will, that's right now, the things that you decide to do right now, whether you close your eyes and switch off and whatever else, or you decide to do something about it, well, those are the things where free will is often operating right now. And once you've made that decision, it moves out into this, that the prior free will is where it actually is where free will is still very important in what has happened. But in some ways, it's in the past. Most of our life is like this. We see this probably mostly here, where we're constantly observing that somehow or other life is very constrained, and it is because we made the decision this morning and this afternoon, therefore I live with the consequences. I hope that's okay. That's the way I see it, and that's the way I see plasticity working within this. Now, I said free will operates within the brain. There's a classical example of how we know this. That's the Phineas Gage experiment. Not experiment, he was a mimer. Sorry, this is very bad to say experiment. This was his physician, Marlowe, and he wrote several papers on this, and this one was entitled The Passage of an Iron Bar Through the Head. So, because when he was packing the explosives into the hole, the iron bar, the explosive went off, and the iron bar came out of the hole and went through his head in this manner here, and he survived, and that was the key thing to this. And so this doctor analysed how he changed, and you can read here the equilibrium of balance, so to speak, between his intellectual facilities and the animal propensities seems to have been destroyed. He is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom. It was defining.
How long did he live between?
He lived, as far as I know, he lived quite a while, because there were several papers written on it, but I couldn't tell you precisely. I did read the papers, and it probably says in it, but some time ago since I've read them. It was in the 1800s, 1840 something, I believe, was one of the papers. 1840 to the 1870s, so somewhere in that region with the papers. That would give an idea. Actually, I think it was a period of over 20 or 30 years the two papers were written. That would give you an idea. It probably did live for quite a while afterwards. But anyhow, they were able to observe him, and it very strongly pointed out that many of these things, his ability to do, and his changes in the freedoms that he had, and the way in which he was operating now and couldn't help himself, but that actually was very clearly not in the soul. So in the 1800s, it would have been described as the soul. Now it's the brain. The brain is clearly the seat of this and where it's all happening. And there are many present-day examples of this. You could read this one here. So we give these sorts of drugs to treat Parkinson's. Normally, we're generally risk-averse. If the risks are greater than the rewards, we compute it. We have areas of the brain that do this. But if we give these dopamine 2 agonists, or even cocaine, it says here, this decision-making process is defective, and you need to warn these patients they're going to become immoral, or they're going to go and spend all their money, spend all their money, and they have to be warned, because that is a direct consequence of taking the drug, and we know that that is actually affecting the process and the ability to actually make these decisions. So it doesn't mean, freedom. Yes, we have freedom. Those freedoms are constrained by the processes that underlie those processes. So what is the thing that gives the most exciting thing? I've just skipped to what I would say would be a number 3 here. I think plasticity, the idea that you can constantly remodel, it's a very hopeful thing, that we can actually constantly remodel the brain. So this is the explanation of why what you do on a daily basis, it becomes like an addiction. You do it today, you do it tomorrow, you do it afterwards, then it gets laid down in a pathway in the brain. And those pathways we can see very clearly are laid down and we can monitor them. And so you asked about synapses earlier on. This is a synapse, an EM picture of a neuron. I could explain it, but it's like an electrical connection in the brain. And if we look at synapses over time, we can see that the number of synapses in this particular neuron has increased. Okay, many more buds on this neuron, because that particular animal was actually undergoing visual stimulation, and it learned how to it was opening its eyes and beginning to see, and so it developed. So that is what we mean by plasticity. There are many levels of it. That's just one level of it happening in your brain all the time. You're changing. Now, could this animal then change that? Maybe not that particular neuron, but it'll change other ones. So we can change. So we're constantly learning. We know that. You know the information you learned today. You might remember some of it tomorrow. So you have a practical demonstration of how you're learning. You can also forget. You can also change what you've learned in the past. You can change the habits that we've learned. In some ways, we are moving into the image of God if we want to, because we are changing, physically changing. Now, why is that happening to us? I need to just skip so I give time for us to talk. Is that okay? Okay, yeah. That just skips me towards the very end. So, in some ways, absolutely we can change, and we need to change, and that changing is part of the freedom. But is that ability to change something that we control? Yes, it is. It is something we control, but it's largely constrained by your environment. Again, it's largely constrained by the people around us that are influencing us and helping us to change. And in some ways, it's meant to be like this. I may not have the ability today to do the things I ought to do, and I might rely on my wife to actually remind me to do them, or I might rely on a friend to help me to do them, and it's meant to be like that. Because the brain just simply doesn't have the capacity to do all of this and to do. It's designed like that. That is the way we sit. So I have to help her, she has to help me. We all have to help each other. We live in a community. That is the way to change. That is the way to grow as a community, and we're meant to grow in that way. That is the design of the process. And so what underlies the whole of this possibilities is the fact that the brain is the, as I said, the integrator, the probabilistic integrator of information. So it takes all the past memories, all the things we've learned in the past, maybe the habits, maybe the good things, maybe the good memories, all of those things. And it looks at the future predictions of what might happen, what you might do when we walk out of here, what will be the good things that you would desire in life for yourself, for your family, puts all of those things together. And with plasticity, is able to change. It's able to integrate, is able to actually change and determine something. You are able to actually make a decision and change the future. I said we already do that with the help of everybody around us, because that's how we are designed. We are taking in far more information from around us than we possibly can imagine. And that influence is so influential on how the brain works. And the most influential thing that is happening around us is the relationship. It can be, if you choose it to be, your relationship with God. Whether you said earlier on to me, just before the talk, whether I'm aware of what God is doing around me, whether I'm listening to what God is saying to me, that is the most influential thing that you can possibly have in your life, because you carry it with you every single minute of the day. Many different reasons. It provides a moral compass. I can give you, I think I wrote down probably quite a lot of the reasons for it in the paper, so let me not go over and say that is why I would say God is the surrounder of this. Freedom operates, but it operates within a constrained environment, and we like that constrained environment. We don't like to find that there isn't an edge to the world and we're going to fall off it. And we won't fall off it because God is there at the edge. That's it. Thank you.